Hi, Mama Tree here. So, I mentioned in the write-up for the videos that I was going to talk about this model by Elizabeth Kübler-Ross called the Stages of Death and Dying, or sometimes called the Stages of Grief. So, the stages themselves are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And they don't go one right after another like stair steps. So you could circle back around. You could actually be in a couple at once, feeling a lot of tension. I'm going to give you some examples from my perspective. So denial, that's pretty obvious. Denial is like, this can't happen. How could this happen? You know, I lost my son 2 weeks ago, and there are still little parts of my brain that think maybe he's just going to walk in the door. And, you know, it just takes time for it to sink in. And then there's bargaining. Bargaining is like, why, God, why? Why me? If I had just done this, if I had just done that, you know, if I could just do this or that, maybe you could take it away. For instance, when I was experiencing this health crisis and facing the strong possibility that I was going to lose my job, the bargaining looked like, well, if I just took this medicine, or if I just took this supplement, or if I just went to this workshop, God, couldn't you just fix it all, you know? Or I'll be really, really good. I promise I'll never engage in these bad habits, and I'll start all these good habits. Please just fix it for me. So there's your bargaining. Anger. Anger is not a fun one to do. Anger can rear its head in a lot of different ways. You could have, in the case of losing my son just yesterday, I had the first little just ugly sting. You know, I'm ashamed to even admit it. Just ugly, gnarly thought of like, why my kid? Why couldn't it be that kid? That kid's not very special. Well, duh. I mean, the logical self says, shut up. That's horrible. Don't say that. Don't think that. It came up again last night in my dream. This boy was in my dream, and he's not my baby. He's not as phenomenal. You know, he's not me. Well, yeah, that's a version of me missing my son. That's really not about that other child, who, by the way, is a fine child, and I'm sure his mother loves him, right? So but it's ugly, though. It could also be anger towards other people, other parents, or other people in the family. I expect people in the family to be angry at me. Why did you have to pull him off video games and go for a bike ride? Why couldn't you just let him stay on his video game all day? Well, yeah, you know, but their logical brain is going to come in and say, obviously, she didn't want him to die on a bicycle. She didn't want him to spend all his time playing video games either, you know. But see, there's nothing logical about emotions. Okay, so we've done denial and bargaining and anger and grief. I think sometimes it's described as depression, sometimes it's described as grief. And this one's tricky because how do you tell the difference between clinically depressed, needing medication, possibly suicidal, and normal, healthy, you lost someone very special depression and grief? Because I'm going to tell you, you can't get through the loss of your child or your spouse or your health or your career without feeling some form of blech, right? It's just not going to happen. And no amount, in my opinion, no amount of psych meds is going to change that. You have to do the time and feel the low feelings. But how do you figure out when it's too low? That's a question we each have to decide. I think I've heard in older customs and civilizations, you know, village life, for instance, they might say that a woman should grieve her husband and then a year later just be done with it, move on, marry someone else. So, you know, sometimes we come up with these sort of random numbers and we say, okay, be really sad for 3 months or 6 months. And that's up to you. I don't have an answer for that. But grieving death and the depression of processing death isn't the same as a clinical depression. And it is good to get therapy. We're all going to go to therapy. It starts next week, I think. The last one is acceptance. Again, these don't come in order. It goes around and around.